As a Superman fan, have you ever wondered what would happen if a person who knew barely anything about comics decided to absorb hundreds of Superman stories from all eras and media? Robbo is that kind of person, and that's exactly what he's done on a new show called This Podcast Will Never Die. The first season, called Superman Will Never Die, starts with the unexpected ways the Man of Steel stood out from the pulp heroes on the newsstands in 1938. Listen and subscribe to This Podcast Will Never Die, and you'll never look at Superman's trunks the same way again. Attention horror fans, Colleen, A Vlada Tale of the Damned is the forthcoming comic book sequel to Vlada, A Dracula Tale, a gender-swapped spin on the world of Dracula, featuring an original story by Chris Denmead and art by Matt Slay and Tim Vigil. The Kickstarter campaign for this 28-page comic launches on August 15th. Visit Colleen, A Vlada Tale of the Damned on Kickstarter and sign up now to be notified on launch. Check out the Vlada, A Dracula Tale Facebook page for more. We all love the big-budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of unbridled creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. Submission information for filmmakers can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and much more. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the comic book origin of Superman's HYPNO glasses, as now seen on screen in James Gunn's film, is Superman author and historian Ed Gross. Welcome back.
Thank you, Anthony. Looking forward to it, as always.
I'm excited to get into this and keep a little bit of our movie momentum going here. Obviously, we've done multiple episodes about the film. I've shared my thoughts, but this is the first opportunity where you and I have had a chance to speak about it. So let me just ask you, what did you think of the film?
I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, look, is it going to change the world? No, but it is. The feeling I have, just the feel good feeling, just feeling so uplifted when I walked out of that movie. And I've seen it a couple of times and come away with it even more so. I mean, I just think that David Corn Sweat was a great choice to play Superman. I really do. And he just gets that essence. And I think James Gunn did a wonderful job of capturing what Superman's all about. And that's not the detriment of anything that's come before. It really isn't. It's just stating that this movie right now, with the world the way it is just a very uplifting experience watching this movie. And yes, they included the John Williams theme, and I'm very happy that they did.
Great. No, like I said in my initial reaction episode, that feeling that I had while watching it was really key to my overall experience. So I'm glad that you had a similar type of experience. And look, we've talked a lot on and off mic, and you've written a lot about your whole idea of following the cape. Right. And
follow the S, my friend.
Follow the S. Follow the S.
Follow the S. Yes.
But I'm glad that you followed it to this next iteration and that you had this kind of experience. That's great.
Yeah, and it's funny. My brother, who back in 1978 I was 18, so he was 10. He went with me to see Superman the movie, and he went with me to see this one again, and it was just kind of cool. Like, I think it's the first movie, or not with the first movie, one of the few movies we've actually gone to together over the years, and so it's kind of cool having that experience again, and he liked it too. So that was even better.
Beautiful. So I will issue a spoiler warning, although I don't expect that we'll get that heavy into spoilers, but there will be some. So if you're listening to this and you still haven't seen the movie, just be warned that we will be talking about it. But specifically, we'll focus on this business about the HYPNO glasses and the comic book it's derived from. And when we talk about it, we'll find out that HYPNO glasses is actually a bit of a misnomer if we're going based on the original comic book. Hypnosis is involved, but it has more to do with Superman's power than the glasses themselves. But we'll get into all of that. And I thought this would also be a great opportunity for us to sort of widen out the discussion and talk a bit about the Clark Superman identity, how it's been depicted and how that's evolved across time and media. So I think it'll be a lot of fun. So this business with the HYPNO glasses, in the lead up to the movie's release, the way I learned about it, there was an interview Gunn did with one of these outlets, and I was scrolling on my social media feed and I saw the video where the interviewer was like, "Oh, James, I got to tell you, I love the HYPNO glasses." And James was very pleased with himself. He was like, it's from the comics. And he talked about how one of his hangups with this film was trying to reconcile how people can't figure out that Clark and Superman are one and the same. And then DC Comics writer and DCU architect Tom King clued James Gunn in on the fact that there was this comic in the Bronze Age where Superman used quote unquote HYPNO glasses. And that became James Gunn's solution. And in the movie, we learn about that through dialogue between Guy Gardner and Lois Lane. So Guy is the one who spills the beans about this and describes it as the glasses making Clark appear different in your brain than he actually looks. Before we get to the comic book that this comes from, just kind of your reaction to HYPNO glasses being a thing in this movie. How did you feel about it?
I really didn't have a problem with it because I could accept the fact that Jeff Loeb once put out there that he vibrates his face slightly and that's how people don't recognize them. So that was his way of getting around it, right? I thought it was funny actually. I didn't remember the comic connection actually, but I was like, all right, he's hypnotizing people as he looks at them, and I think it actually comes out sooner, doesn't it? In the apartment or something? Doesn't he say the thing with Lois where he says, she goes, people are going to figure out when you interview yourself that you're Superman. He goes, oh, there's the glasses. I mean,
right. Well, in a vacuum,
doesn't say HYPNO glasses,
right?
But,
So in a vacuum, and we had seen that clip in one of the trailers, right? And so my initial read was, yeah, he's referring to the glasses as part of his overall disguise, right? But yes, then when you couple that with that later scene with Guy, yes, that's seemingly what he's referring to in the kitchen where he's like the glasses.
Right. And the thing is this, it's a goofy idea, right? It's just a comic book, silly idea. However, if for all these years we've accepted the fact that Clark Kent puts on a pair of glasses and nobody could tell that he's Superman, then why not? Why not that be an explanation to provide a little something that you can hang on and say, all right, that's why they don't recognize it because he's hypnotizing everybody he looks at. Although I have to say, Corn Sweat did a good job, I thought, with the hair and the talking and the way he carried himself without being like, imitating Christopher Reeve's version of Clark Kent. But he at least made himself look different. The hair is like completely different, and that does make a difference. Think of how many times people change their hair, and at first you're like, oh, wait, is that you? So.
Yeah, absolutely. So from my perspective, and obviously we've touched on the HYPNO glasses already, they did not ruin the movie for me, but I did find them to be totally unnecessary. And I felt like Gunn invented a problem that really didn't exist and solved it kind of awkwardly. But like I said, it didn't ruin the movie for me. The scene between Guy and Lois is certainly humorous. I still wish that the movie had just given me a little bit of ambiguity, a little bit of plausible deniability. If Lois had rolled her eyes when he was talking about the HYPNO glasses, well, then I can believe that maybe Guy just made this up, or maybe it's something Superman just told him, but it's not really true. But her apparent confirmation of that was a little disheartening to me, but clearly this is something that is important to Gunn. So I don't want to be overly dramatic. And so I'm going to preface this by saying, again, I have been singing the praises of this movie. I was not one of those people beforehand posting selfies of myself looking up or hashtagging in James Gunn we trust.
Right.
That was not my approach, and I'm glad. But I can honestly say, and I've been saying, Gunn really won me over. And I enjoyed this movie a lot, and he earned a ton of trust and goodwill from my perspective. I feel like the character is in good hands, okay? So I'm going to put that out there first. At the same time, there is something kind of troubling to me that the person handling the character has that much of a hang up about the disguise. And I don't want to be hyperbolic, but to me, it would be like if Matt Reeves was like, it just doesn't make sense that Bruce Wayne can do all these things. He doesn't have any powers. We got to give him some powers. It's like, no, that's the thing. That's the thing. And I feel like when we talk about the Superman secret identity, the phrase suspension of disbelief comes up a lot. I know I've used it when talking about it, and understandably so, but I kind of want to go past that because I feel like we don't have to rely on suspension of disbelief alone for accounting for the secret identity, because I feel like in comics and on screen, like we've seen, and just our own lives, I think we can reconcile how the secret identity can work. Like, generally, I don't know how observant people are. Like, just kind of thinking about our real world scenario. I don't know how observant people are. I mean, I remember when one of the Henry Cavill movies was coming out and he was like hanging out in Times Square, like nobody recognized him.
Right.
Right.
But you don't expect Henry Cavill to be hanging out in Times Square, and that's a big part of it. You're just not thinking, oh, look, I'm going to meet Henry Cavill if I hang out in Times Square.
Yeah, just as I genuinely don't think people in the world of the DC universe expect that Superman has a civilian secret identity. I mean, it comes up a lot. You know, we talk about this when we talk about the George Reeves series, right? A lot of times where people are trying to figure out who Superman really is. And I always say to myself, why do they think he's anybody? Like, why do they think he has a day job?
Yeah, there is that. But I mean, George Reeves, of course, didn't do much to disguise himself as Superman. I mean, that's a whole other conversation.
I know. Well, and we'll touch on that too.
Yeah.
But just kind of on the real world front, I don't know how observant people are. People these days just have their heads buried in their phones most of the time, right?
Absolutely.
We had, when Bernie was here for the pregame show, he talked about how different his own daughter looks when she's wearing glasses. From my own experience, you know, I got LASIK about a decade ago or more, but prior to that, you know, wore contacts for years. But occasionally at work, I would just pop on my glasses instead of the contacts. And there were numerous instances where I would be standing in front of someone I work with on a daily basis, and it took them a beat to recognize me. Now, yes, they ultimately did, but still, there was enough of that. Plus, I'm going to cite, you know, one of my all-time favorites, and I know you're a fan as well, but Superman Birthright.
Yeah. One
of the early issues of that comic book series, you have Clark working with Jonathan and Martha to craft the civilian identity. And it's not just the glasses, although the glasses are key. Martha talks about how they cut the piercing blue of Clark's eyes and they change the shape of his face. Plus his hair is styled differently and he wears baggier clothes and he slouches a little bit and his voice is higher, right? And on screen, I mean, probably the biggest and best example we always cite is Christopher Reeve in Lois Lane's apartment in Superman the movie. And that shift from Clark to Superman and back again. I mean, masterclass.
Yes, absolutely. Great moment. Everyone, when I was writing the books, that's all people would go to when we talk about the differences between Clark and Superman. Everybody went to that scene, you know, with Christopher Reeve because it's brilliant. And it's just, you see the transformation in front of your eyes.
And so all to say, it's not just the glasses. And going back to the George Reeves show, this comes up a lot because there are instances, and we talk about them on our other podcast all the time, where the Daily Planet crew sees Clark without his glasses. They don't recognize him. And I know for some fans, I think sometimes that can be a little bit of a problem. But for me, it's like, no, I get it because it's not just the glasses. If it's just the glasses that are keeping people from putting two and two together, then I think this does kind of fall apart. But it's the fact that people aren't necessarily looking. And it's the fact that it's not just the glasses. So that's why I've never had that much of an issue, especially when we're talking about the average person on the street, the average metropolis citizen. I don't have any trouble at all kind of buying that they would be fooled by this. Another example we've cited a lot is from American Alien, when Pete Ross and Kenny Braverman come to visit Clark in the big city. And I think it's Pete who's like, you know, do people ever see you without your glasses? What do they say? And he goes, they say you look a lot like Superman. And that's it. Right?
Right.
So there are so many ways that this has been accounted for. And so I feel like for the average person, I don't feel like this requires much of a suspension of disbelief, to be perfectly honest. Where it gets trickiest, and maybe I can't speak for Mr. Gunn, but maybe this is where he had the hardest time. I think it is when you're talking about people who interact with Clark and Superman on any kind of regular basis.
Yeah.
Right? Presumably we're talking about Lois, Perry, Jimmy, right?
Right.
My headcanon and the official position of this podcast, Ed, has always been that Perry White knows. Like, Perry knows. He just doesn't say anything. He's too smart not to know. He knows.
Okay.
I feel like we can extend this to Jimmy, and depending on the depiction, depending on what kind of Jimmy we're talking about. And I feel like Skylar Gizondo's Jimmy from this movie, this reluctant Riz God, as he's been referred to online, I feel like he might be in that category. Because can't you envision a scene in a subsequent movie where it comes out that he knows and Clark is like, oh, you never said anything. And Jimmy's like, yeah, man, like, I didn't want to salt your game. I just figured you would tell me when you were ready. Like, you could totally see that.
Well, it's like My Adventures with Superman, Jimmy, in that.
Yes.
I mean, right? He just said, because I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. You know, so that they do it there.
Now, Lois, right? This is where it's most difficult, I suppose. On the one hand, this didn't need to be a problem for this particular movie because we're already past that point in the story. So they really didn't even have to account for it. But if they did, I always kind of default to Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. And the idea floated in that series that she was, for lack of a better term, blinded by love.
Right.
And that's why she wasn't able to put this together. A little cheesy, maybe, but I kind of like that idea because she's so smart, right? So I feel like that's a way to show that there was this element of denial because of these feelings that she was having. So I feel like even with Lois, there's a way to account for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I totally agree. And yeah, the whole thing though with the like the glasses thing, just going back to what you were saying, like was it necessary? Um and I have to say that no, it wasn't necessary. And to me though, it wasn't like, oh my God, he's wearing hypno glasses and that could go, we could apply that to Lois too, that Lois wouldn't know and all that stuff. But to me, it was more like almost a humorous, like, all right, we're gonna get this out of the way. He wears hypno glasses. He hypnotizes people so they don't see that he looks like Superman. And that's the last time it's mentioned. And it's not a plot point. It's nothing. It's just a throwaway joke. And that's how I look at it in general. You say suspension of disbelief, and I guess that's the best way to put it. I accept it on that level. And even with Lois, until she gets close enough, when the feelings are there for Clark and stuff, and she's suddenly seeing, I mean, who knows how they met, or I mean, and not how they met, but how they fell in love and all that, because we don't see that. It's already happened, or it's happening as we see. But I accept the fact that, once you get to know somebody, it's like somebody you're not attracted to, but you get to know them better, and suddenly they're looking very attractive, and suddenly you're looking a little deeper, and suddenly you're seeing things about them you never saw before. I could easily see that happening when she starts developing feelings for Clark, and she looks a little closer, and it's like, wait a minute, he's Superman. And you know what I mean? I could see that as a means in which she did it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree. It's such a minimal part of the movie. Unfortunately, that does kind of go hand in hand with what I would say is my main gripe with the film is the relative lack of Clark the reporter in the film.
I agree with that. There should have been more of Clark. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it remains to be seen how this will be utilized, if at all. I mean, I don't know how many more references we're going to get, if we're ever going to actually see the glasses at play, if we're ever going to see what someone else sees when they look at Clark. I have no idea. And this might be as far as it ever goes. And like I said, it's not the hill I'm going to die on. It's fine. Right. I found that individual scene humorous, but it's more just kind of the idea and the fact that Gunn perceived this to be a problem, that it's just a little disheartening to me, but it is what it is. It's fodder for what I think is a great episode here for us to do, which is to take a look at Superman number 330, which had a cover date of December 1978. It was written by Martin Pascoe and drawn by Kurt Swan. And this was the Bronze Age tale that introduced the idea of the so-called hypno glasses. This is what presumably Tom King was referring to when he was talking to James Gunn about a potential solution. It has a very, I think, what has now become an iconic cover, because in the lead up to and the aftermath of the movie, I know it's been circulated a lot online, but yeah. Superman in that pair of glasses pointing at himself saying, "Lana, now do you believe I'm Clark Kent?" And Lana going, "Of course not. What kind of idiot do you take me for? This is what Clark Kent looks like," as she holds up a photo that he sees and we don't.
Right.
Now, I guess you had already answered this before, but so you were not familiar with this, because I know you were reading in the Bronze Age generally, right?
I was. I mean, yeah, I'll be honest with you, though. Once we got past the Kryptonite Nevermore storyline, and he's kind of like back at full power right after that story ended, and I don't know, that was a little bit of a turnoff for me. And also, I don't know what happened. We moved from Brooklyn, and that made a big difference too. I wasn't getting comics the way I used to get them. So I kind of fell out of reading them. It became a thing where I read them every now and then, as opposed to like religiously going out to the comic shop because we used to have a place in Brooklyn that we'd go to every weekend, like get back issues, get current issues, get everything, and I didn't have the access to that sort of thing. So I kind of fell out of it. So yeah, I missed a lot of these, a lot of my homework for this episode with things I had never read before. So
Gotcha. Yeah, I had never read this before. Frustratingly, this, to my knowledge, has never been collected and is also not available on the DC app. So we had to resort to other means, as we sometimes have to do when this happens. You would think that perhaps with the movie, this might be a good opportunity to get that issue scanned and uploaded to the site. That would be nice, just so more people have access to it. But
yeah.
This was definitely the first time I ever read it. Oh, man, I was trying to remember if I even knew about this. And I feel like at some point, unless I've just incepted myself, at some point I feel like I came across the notion of hypno glasses. in the pre-crisis context. But I think that's as far as I ever got. Like, this was wholly new to me. But I think the most general sense of it, maybe I had come across at some point. We'll talk through the issue, but as I was alluding to earlier, what we ultimately find out here is that it's not the glasses themselves, but rather Superman's super hypnosis, one of his abilities that was canon in the pre-crisis history of the character, that he's perpetually emanating this at a very low subconscious level, but that the Kryptonian plexiglass of his eyeglasses amplifies it. Yes. So in the context of this issue, and shout out to one of our audience members, Aiton, who posted in our Facebook group and wanted to make sure that I did not neglect the context, that I did not neglect the fact that Superman had hypnotic abilities. So I've not neglected that. But so in the context of this issue, it's really more an existing ability channeled through and amplified via the glasses, as opposed to the movie, which we don't get a ton of detail about it. But my understanding, even from that little bit from Guy, is that it's really the glasses themselves. Like, was that your read on it from the movie?
I didn't get a sense it was, I mean, well, see, but I've seen him do I'm going to backtrack on before I even finish the first statement. When I was a kid, I remember he used to do super hypnosis in the Silver Age comics. He did do that a number of times. So I think my initial connection was, it's the throwback to the comic where he has the super hypnosis. And whoever he talks to, he's doing, I didn't know about the amplified the lenses amplifying that. I just thought that was a power he had. It's also a power that I kind of find a little creepy. I mean, I don't know if this is the moment I can say this or not, but in the sense of, he goes on this big Kryptonian TV set thing and broadcasts to everybody and I'm going to hypnotize you now to forget this and the other thing. So he does it, and it reminded me of the kiss that makes Lois Lane forget stuff when he kisses her again in Superman 4, brings it back. So it's like, what is this dude doing when with these powers of his that like making people forget him when they kiss him and hypnotizing them to forget other things? And maybe he's really Homelander and he's just tricking us. No, just kidding. But look,
I think there's a reason why super hypnosis went away. I think there's a reason why these hypno glasses, so to speak, were like almost never referred to after this, why they didn't survive to the post-crisis era. I think there are reasons for a lot of this. But going back to the new movie, I may be proven wrong in the next film. Maybe it will turn out he has super hypnosis. My read, and just based on the way Gunn was talking about it, my interpretation of the film is that it's the glasses. Like, there's some sort of Kryptonian technology at play, not that he has super hypnosis and he's channeling it through the glasses. Like I said, I could be wrong, but my read is that it's just the glasses. And I will say, on that front at least, I put the movie over this comic that we're about to talk about. Because if we have to have friggin' hypno glasses, I'd rather that they're just Kryptonian technology glasses.
Sure.
And they allow this, as opposed to he's got this added ability. And it's like, if he did, I feel like there were times he could have used it in the movie. So
absolutely, but I really do believe this was a throwaway line. I mean, one of James Gunn's biggest things, it seemed like didn't want to come into this movie until he had wrestled the issues that he had with Superman down, right? And if that was one of his issues, was how people don't recognize Clark and Superman being the same guy, and this is his solution, it came from a comic, whatever, that's not the point. If that's his solution and he does it as a throwaway joke line, but it's established what's going on, I don't think he's ever got to go back to it again. There's no reason to.
Fair. And I hope he doesn't. I don't
think he will. I really don't think he will. I think it really was a throwaway, and he explains it. Oh, you don't know how people don't tell? Go watch the first movie. You'll see. It's in there.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, you were mentioning this earlier, but in the scene we get of David Corenswet as Clark the reporter, to me, it just worked. I mean, he's not in shtick territory knocking into things, but there's, more of a schlubbiness maybe to him and in the attire, and his hair.
Just a regular guy, though. I mean, that's how I read it,
Yeah, but no, my point is, it's like, I feel like it was sufficient, right? To kind of, anyway, I've said my piece on that. But as far as this issue goes, so I gave our creators, but as I'm sure you notice in the credits of the issue, it's based on a story concept by Al Schroeder III. Do you know who this is?
No, I don't know.
Okay, so he was a frequent letter writer. So he would write into the letters page of the books, and apparently had suggested this in one of his letters and DC went for it and went so far as to give him a story credit. Now,
Wow.
even though I'm not a fan of this idea and even its execution is pretty wonky, which we'll talk about here,
Yeah.
I love the notion that this fan had this opportunity, that he gave this much thought,
Yeah.
had the letter published, and that DC actually took this action and credited him. I mean,
And it's in the movie.
and it's in the movie.
Seriously, it's pretty cool, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, I feel like we manifest a lot of things here on this podcast, but if I'm ever fortunate enough to articulate something so specific that gets used and that my name shows up in a comic or anything, I mean, I'd be over the moon. So from a fan to fan, very cool. I looked him up. Sadly, he passed away in 2021. He was only 67. But this was fascinating to me. So he married a woman named Barbara Long, who he met through the letters page.
Oh, that's amazing.
And they struck up this correspondence and ultimately got married. If I'm not mistaken, I think she reached out to him. I don't think I have that backwards. I think she reached out to him. But I mean, that's really beautiful.
That's a really great story. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then this issue, though, funny enough, according to my little research that I did, the events of this issue ultimately got relegated to Earth 32, according to the Absolute Edition of Crisis on Infinite Earths, which I don't own. But
okay.
So Earth 32 is what they would use for inconsistencies and non-canon events as they pertain to Earth 1. So anything that was like a little off, Earth 32.
Oh, this is a really stupid idea. Put it on Earth 32. Wow. I never heard that before. That's great, though.
And now, I mean, I know you said you had kind of dropped out after the Kryptonite Nevermore business, so maybe this is not something that you can answer. But my understanding, and based on what I've just heard from folks who are Bronze Age readers, I don't think this ever got referenced or used much, if at all, after this. Like, do you have?
I've never even heard of it.
Okay.
I mean, I've never heard of it in any incarnation of Superman. And even when, like, Bob Greenberger really wrote the majority of the comic history in Superman the Definitive History, and I read it, and there's no mention of it there, and I've just never heard of this before. So, but to me, like I said before, hearing it, it was like, oh yeah, that's natural from the comics. He used to be able to do super hypnosis, that sort of thing. But
and clearly James Gunn never heard of it, but you know who did hear of it? Tom King.
Yes,
it's just like it's one of those funny things where, and I don't know if Tom King has talked about this in interviews or anything, but it's like, for something that was either forgotten or purposely ignored by other fans and creators for decades.
right.
For him, clearly, this made an impression. And we think about for ourselves, like what those things are that, really stand out to us, even though for other people, maybe it's not that big of a deal. So it's just kind of funny. But it's like, of all the things, right, like this ends up being the pull by this one creator to the director that ends up getting in the movie. And now everyone's looking for Superman number 330.
Yeah. Well, it's online. Just look for it, kids. But
yeah. So obviously we're not going to go like page by page or anything, but I'll just kind of run through some of the beats of this and get your opinion. So we open with Clark having a nightmare, right? That he's at work and we're firmly in the Bronze Age where he's a television newscaster and works side by side with Lana. And so he's at the GBS offices with Lana, Lois, and Jimmy, and a satellite is crashing towards them. And all of a sudden, they all turn to him, and they're like, come on, we need Superman. Like, we know you're Superman. We've been playing along for years, but we need you now.
right.
And, he wakes up in this panic, and then he goes into the bathroom, and he's standing in front of the mirror, and he puts the glasses on. Like, now he's really second-guessing himself and wondering if people have been seeing through this or there's the risk of them seeing through it, and goes so far as to say, that's the dumbest disguise I've ever seen.
Right.
And chalks it up to the fact that he came up with it when he was a kid, like a dumb idea when he was a kid. And like, it just, and like this stemmed from a fan idea. So I guess it tracks, but like, it just reads like all of the complaints that people have had over the years about the secret identity, right? It's like everything that a fan might have ever said about it articulated by our hero in that moment.
I think you're absolutely right. And yeah, after probably decades of people saying, hey, this doesn't work. So you have fun with it and you just do something with it. I'm not saying the issue is the greatest issue. That's why it's on Earth 32, did you say?
Yeah.
That's why it's set there. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting opening sequence, an interesting nightmare for Clark to have. I can't imagine that's the first time it's ever been depicted in comics that Clark had a nightmare that people were discovering who he is and what a dumb identity it was. But it certainly puts it right out there in your face. So it's interesting.
I'll say this: the fact that he's having that concern and that it's manifesting via a dream like that, interesting. That aspect is interesting. His sort of takeaway from it, I'm not the biggest fan. But,
right. Absolutely.
But the fact that they were wading into that territory, and there's another Bronze Age story we're going to talk about that deals with his dual identity. That's interesting. It just kind of shows, I think, at this point in time that they were delving into some more psychological territory with this, which is welcome.
Well, that was one of the things I think about the Bronze Age. They were really threatened, first of all, by Marvel's sales. So they wanted to make these characters a little more introspective, more conflict, that sort of thing. I can't say I always agree with the approach they took with Superman with this during this period that I have read, but it feels like that's their way of trying to edge him up a little bit and where everything is not simple and he doesn't have any conflict about anything.
Yeah, for sure. So the villain of the piece is a character named Spellbinder. And the next major act in this issue is Superman encountering Spellbinder in the streets of Metropolis. He's hypnotized a driver of an armored car who crashes, and then he hypnotizes other people on the street and they start stealing the diamonds for him. And even goes so far as hypnotizing Superman into believing that he's being attacked by this creature. Are you familiar with Spellbinder in any way, shape, or form?
Not in the least. Not until I read this issue. So hypno glasses and Spellbinder are things that I am totally unfamiliar with, I'm sorry to say, until beyond reading this issue.
It's okay. I don't think you're alone in that. I mean, other than Tom King, obviously. Tom King, I'm sure, knows everything about Spellbinder. There have been different versions of Spellbinder over the years, but initially a Batman villain, and there's even a little editor's note in here about him having tussled with Batman in the past. What's funny, though, is I looking him up, and there was an adaptation of the character in the Batman animated series, which I have not really watched, but also in Batman Beyond, if I'm not mistaken, which I did watch. I just don't have any specific memory of it. But at some point in my youth, I saw a version of this character in animated form.
He just didn't register.
Didn't register and had no idea that there was this comic book connection. But yeah, so this character has had a life beyond this, although clearly not a heavy hitter. So in the aftermath of this, we get to what you were referring to earlier, where Superman has built this giant TV screen.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And it's floating in the sky above Metropolis.
And that's Silver Age stuff, by the way. Having this giant Kryptonian television that he uses to broadcast the signal. I mean, that's so Silver Age. Anyway.
Yeah. And he says that in order to protect the populace against Spellbinder, he needs to hypnotize everyone in the city using his super hypnosis. He's going to hypnotize them with a post-hypnotic suggestion that will make them resistant to hypnosis. So he's going to hypnotize them all into not being able to be hypnotized.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
but they all have to agree. They have to be willing for him to.
If you don't believe, you won't be hypnotized, kind of thing. If you don't believe or willing to do it, yeah.
Yeah. So we have that. We have that bit of business, and then so this is where now we're starting to wade into the identity issue here and where we're going with the hypno glasses of it all. But he's back in the offices in the wardrobe area. He's changing from Superman back to Clark, and Lana Lang walks in and catches him mid-change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he thinks this is it.
That's it.
He's been found out.
Yep.
Right? But what did you make of her reaction?
Well, I mean, it fits in perfectly. His reaction was the funnier reaction because he's like freaking out, like it's over. Now they're going to know that Clark Kent is Superman. And oh my God, what am I going to do? And she's like, you don't look anything like Superman. What are you talking about? Like she does not see it, which is for the reader, obviously is very confusing. It's like, boy, you really are dumb. That you're not getting this.
Yeah, I know. It is very striking because she's like, no, like you're so much more muscular and handsome than Clark is.
Right.
And I think he even says, you were one of the ones who always thought that I was really Clark. And she's like, yeah, but I could never figure out like how you made yourself look so different.
Right. Exactly. It's like, well, those damn hypno glasses we never knew about. And he didn't either. That's the most amazing thing.
Right. So we're not getting the full explanation yet, but this is definitely kind of a very jarring instance where clearly he's being perceived differently by Lana here. So he next tries to hypnotize himself so that he won't be able to be hypnotized again in the future. Right. But then he heads into another battle with Spellbinder and is once again hypnotized. So it's for whatever reason, he was not able to hypnotize himself. And then we'll find out later when he did this, on himself or tried to, he was wearing the glasses. Right. And those same properties that amplify his subliminal hypnosis also prevent him from being able to hypnotize himself.
Such comic book logic. Oh my God. Go ahead.
And so then in the final confrontation with Spellbinder, he realized the Spellbinder has been using sound rather than visuals to hypnotize, at least in certain instances, and with Superman in particular. And Superman uses earplugs, and that's what allows him to be immune from it this time. And he ends up digging what he calls an echo canyon and plopping Spellbinder there. And so his own effect sort of backfires on himself, on Spellbinder, and he knocks himself out.
That's what they said.
And so then we have the very, very exposition heavy explanation here at the very end about what all of this has been about. Because he had asked one of the GBS artists to draw portraits of Clark and of Superman based on photographs, right? So he retrieves these portraits and he sees the Superman portrait matches up with the photo, but the Clark drawing does not match the photograph of Clark. And then we get this explanation. He puts it all together and he realizes, as we said before, that his super hypnotism is always at work subconsciously at a low level, and that the Kryptonian glass in his eyeglasses, and they even give you flashbacks to him with his rocket ship, right? Taking the glass that had broken into perfect circles.
Oh, that was the best. It broke it conveniently. It happened to break into those sizes for lenses.
Yeah. So his super hypnosis is always emanating, and this Kryptonian glass intensifies the effect and projects a weaker, frailer image of Clark into the minds of others. What's funny is we don't get to see much of what other people see. I mean, it's really, if I'm not mistaken, it's really just in that drawing.
Where he looks like an old man, frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, he kind of looks like a much older man than he is. So, it's a little confusing.
and they, like I said, like I said, I'm very happy for Mr. Schroeder that he had this opportunity and his idea was used. But in terms of the execution, it just kind of reads like this, kind of fan fiction-y type thing. And so over this last page and a half, we get they dot all their I's and cross their T's and they explain everything. So the reason why Lana only saw Superman earlier is that the hypnotic block that he had put on everybody, right, was working in that particular instance. That's why even though she saw Superman in the glasses, she didn't realize. Right.
Yeah.
And like we said earlier, he couldn't self-hypnotize because of the glasses as he was wearing them. One of our audience members and guests, Daniel Sanchez, he had asked when I shared that I was going to be doing this episode, he was like, how does it work with cameras and photographs? Well, they explain that too. Superman says cameras must reproduce my eyes hypno effect perfectly. So is the idea...
It's just, I'd rather take a throwaway line from James Gunn, thank you, than this whole detailed explanation on how these glasses work.
Yeah, it's a bit much. I mean, what I know I'm looking for something where there's really nothing there, but cameras must reproduce my eyes hypno effect perfectly. I mean, but does that mean, because when he's looking at the photograph of Clark, right, it looks like Clark. So is it that anyone else who's looking at a photograph, that's where the effect is being had? Yeah.
I guess you're trying to figure out a logical answer to this, and I haven't got one, my friend. I mean, and when he's doing the news on TV, he's projecting that to everybody on the planet, whoever's watching, theoretically millions of people watching him each night on the news.
And then they even acknowledge that the trance lingers. So that's why instances where he's been powerless, his identity was preserved because the trance lingered long enough for him to get his powers back. And the story concludes by answering the question it posed at the very beginning about who is truly the master mesmerizer of Metropolis. Well, turns out, kids, it's not Spellbinder, it's Superman.
On Earth 32, please. Thank you. Wow.
I mean, that's Superman 330.
Rough stuff, man. It's rough. I love comic book logic to a certain point, but when you go over so many backflips trying to say, well, this is how this works, it just becomes a little all right, you put obviously way too much thought into this. And it gets silly. I mean, and to me, this was just silly. I mean, I just rather people not recognize him with his glasses. Thank you.
Yeah,
Because
I think this shows the risk of over
yeah,
explaining. Now for me, the fact that we even have the hypno glasses in the movie, I guess falls into that category. But to your point, and I don't disagree with you, you're right. It's like they don't go into this level of detail, thankfully.
no, it's just a throwaway thing. Like, look, I need to get past this when I was writing the script, and that was my solution. And boom, I did it. It's over, and now I can move forward.
Yeah.
That's my envisioning of getting into James Gunn's head while he was writing this thing.
Does this make you want to read more Bronze Age
No,
tales?
I mean, look, yeah, I take that back. I mean, I do occasionally would love to go back, and I probably will go back because, in truth, I didn't even remember how long Clark was a reporter for WGBS. I mean, I had no idea that, like, when we were reading the stuff we read for this discussion, that he's still a reporter. It's like I had this image again, not following it, that it was very short after Kryptonite Nevermore that he went back to just the Daily Planet.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to answer my own question. This does not turn me off Bronze Age Superman, nor do I think that this singular issue is representative of the entire era. And I will say, look, it gave us an episode. We're not done. We have more to say, but it gave us the main thrust of an episode, and
Yeah.
it was really fascinating to look at, even if I do think it's silly and unnecessary and it's just too much is kind of what
That's really what it is. It's too much. It's just you really didn't have to go into this kind of detail. First of all, I didn't ask. Do you know what I mean? If you'd go in this kind of detail about it, I would have just accepted it. Oh, he's got hypno glasses or whatever it is. He projects through his thing. Okay, good. Don't need to know that you're, like I said, holding up big TVs and hypnotizing the city. That veers into creepy territory for me. But
I think I know what your answer will be, but I'll pose it nevertheless. I'll pose it also for our audience here. So those last couple of pages explain any question you might have. But do any questions linger for you? Is there anything about how the hypnosis and the glasses work in this comic book issue not addressed that you're still wondering even after you read?
No, I can tell you no, because I didn't care that much to begin with. I mean, I never gave it that much thought. I just accepted this is this thing that's I never needed an explanation for it. I just took it as, you began this conversation by bringing up the suspension of disbelief. To me, it's always been who Clark Kent and Superman is. That's his disguise. He wears glasses. He's been wearing glasses since 1938, and people don't know he's Superman. I just go with it and accept it because I don't know. I can't take it that seriously that way. I take Superman very seriously, but when it comes to those sort of details, it's like I would have been I could have lived the rest of my life not knowing about these hypno glasses, and especially about this long convoluted history of them on Earth 32. So
no, I hear you. Well, I appreciate you reading that issue, and
yeah.
I'm glad we're talking about it because I'm sure. Look, I'm sure there are people who went out and maybe they ordered the issue on eBay or they found it online the same way we did, and they've read it or they're going to read it. But I know there's probably a bunch of people who have never read it and will never read it, but now they've experienced it through our talking about it. So
they don't have to read it.
Yeah. So
if they don't want to, they don't have to.
my love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring great insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode. And the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk now that their series rewatch has concluded. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, Star Wars, and more. We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a new podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics. And if the title also makes you think of Superman, you're not alone, as the Man of Steel is Logan's favorite character and a regular topic of discussion on Single Bound. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at Single Bound Podcast. Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow them on social media. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. Yeah, so I'm glad we spoke about it. And like I said, I feel like this could be kind of a good springboard to talk about the Clark Superman identity generally.
Yeah.
And in a lot of this, we've hit on in various episodes over the years, but I thought this would be a good way to sort of kind of capture and collect all of it and share our updated thoughts now that we have another iteration of the character and the dual identity. And obviously, I've been thinking about this a lot and not breaking any new ground here, but I think probably the biggest line of demarcation we can draw is between pre-crisis and post-crisis in both the comics and their related media adaptations, where in pre-crisis territory, Superman was the true persona and Clark was the disguise, the meek, mild reporter. So much so that language and who disguised as Clark Kent is something that we would see and hear a lot with the radio and Fleischer and Adventures of Superman and so on. Whereas in the post-crisis landscape, which is when I grew up and became a fan of the character, that was completely flipped, right? We have the line from Clark and Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, where he says, Clark Kent is who I am, Superman is what I can do, right? Now, in both of those eras, because I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, in both of those eras, there are definitely exceptions and nuances in both, and I want to hit on those as well. But I guess kind of big picture, what's the interpretation of the dual identity that has always worked best for you and resonated most?
The thing that I stick with is the idea that Clark Kent is the real person, that the Clark Kent raised in Smallville, that's who he is. I mean, the costume, like, is what he does, right? Like you said in the show. But I do feel that way because Clark grew up in Smallville, raised by Jonathan and Martha, given all those morals that would become such an important part of his life and to guide him through his life, basically. So I have to believe that that's the real guy. And then one day he said, "Oh, I'm going to put on this costume so this way I could be a hero to the world, present myself to the world in public." And then needing, of course, the glasses, the HYPNO glasses. But that to me has always been the case, that Clark Kent is the real guy. He just happens to have these superpowers and puts on the costume to do good. That's it in a nutshell, basically. I think, Clark. Now, what about you? Where do you fall on that?
I agree. Well, no, it's just funny. I'm laughing because I agree. And that's music to my ears, kind of in terms of what you're saying, because that's the version of the character I grew up with. Right. And in reading the Triangle era comics, watching Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, watching Superman, the animated series, and then of course, spending 10 years with Clark Kent on Smallville.
Right.
That's the character I am invested in. That's the character whose journey I'm following. So that aspect of it always resonates most with me. Although, and I've said this a lot over the years, I mean, for me, it's not even so much that I like the idea of one true persona and a disguise. For me, I really do always gravitate most to this idea of a trinity, right? Where Clark on the farm, but still Clark, right, is the truest, most honest representation of who he is.
Yeah, I agree.
And then there's an element of disguise with both Clark and Superman. And I'll go back to Birthright again. There's one of my favorite pages from one of the final issues of that, where Clark's really at a low point and he's thinking about turning tail and heading back and just kind of packing it in after things have gone very wrong. But then he has this moment and he galvanizes himself and he returns. But right before that, he's just kind of floating there and he's standing and not standing, but flying, and he's got his glasses in one hand and his cape in the other.
Yeah.
And that imagery at, again, a relatively early point in my journey, I mean, it's over 20 years ago at this point, really, I think, kind of crystallized that idea of the three sides, right? And the glasses and the cape, right, are each one side. And then there's the true guy in the middle.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, more generally speaking, kind of that post-crisis interpretation of Clark being who he is. But no, the reason why I was laughing is that, given, kind of the era you grew up in, like, I wouldn't be surprised if you felt the other way.
That Superman was the real guy. And I probably did. I mean, growing up, I probably did until that concept was more introduced.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Although now that I think about reading back on Superboy comics and stuff, It was Clark Kent. I mean, that's who those comics were in the Silver Age, even. It was Clark Kent who would turn into Superboy. And yes, it's Clark Kent now turning into Superman, obviously. But back then, it was a kid being raised. You're seeing the kid be raised, and he just keeps getting involved in these various superheroic things. But so Clark, to me, the Daily Planet Clark is as much a disguise to Clark Kent as Superman is. It's putting on these different outfits, these different clothings, these different personas. But the guy behind both of those things is the real guy. You know how you are different with different people? You know, you act differently with different people. That's kind of like that. Clark is this way with them and Superman with the others.
I mean, no, 100%. I think about that a lot. Like, and I'm sure anyone listening to this, right, this idea resonates that, I mean, like, I like to think I'm fairly consistent no matter who I'm dealing with, but of course there's some variation, conscious or otherwise, right? Whether we're
sure.
in a context with friends or work or fam, right? And so, you know, that idea really resonates. So the idea that, yeah, he has different sides and they come out in these different scenarios. And I think because of the era I grew up in, I think that's one of the reasons why for a while it was a little hard for me to kind of really access a lot of those pre-crisis stories. I think it's why it took a while for me to really love the Christopher Reeve movie series, because that depiction of the character really didn't line up with the way I saw him. So, you know, that was definitely always the perspective I've had. I still do not gravitate towards the idea of, and who disguised as Clark Kent. However, there are a couple of things that have smoothed it over for me a little bit, and I just wanted to share them. So, are you familiar with that Superman 2000 comic book pitch from
somewhat. Yeah.
So this was when Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, Mark Miller, and Tom Peyer put together this pitch to take over the super titles that didn't move forward. And they had this whole reinvention of the character in mind. But the point that I wanted to cite here is they say, in our interpretation, Clark Kent isn't what Superman really is. Clark is what Superman was, until he reached his teenage years and began to realize what all those years of soaking up the Kansas sun had done to his alien cells. Superman's story here is seen as the tale of a Midwest farmer's son who became an alien shortly after puberty. And maybe that doesn't feel like enough of a difference for folks, but that idea kind of always stuck with me. And in a lot of ways, I feel like in the first Christopher Reeve movie, that's kind of what you see.
Right, because the Clark Kent is Clark Kent until he throws that crystal. He gets the crystal and then goes out to the to the North Pole and throws it, and then suddenly that's it. That's the end of that Clark Kent. He suddenly becomes this new guy. I hadn't thought of that, but that's a good point.
I mean, like literally and figuratively, right? We have a different actor, but also in this more spiritual sense. And
same voice.
Yes.
Sorry.
I know. I would love to hear the original scenes with Jeff East's audio. But anyway.
Yeah.
And then the Clark that emerges and goes to work at the Daily Planet is this disguise, right? Yes. And this sticky disguise. Although, as I have said when we covered the movies again not too long ago, I do feel like the bumbling nature of Christopher Reeve's Clark Kent has been exaggerated a bit, including by myself. Like watching it, yes, that's there, and he's knocking some stuff over and whatnot. But it's I don't know, it's not as, people like it's stuff, not as over the top as I think a lot of us always think of it. And there are instances where he's doing it to accomplish something, or even jumping ahead to like Superman 3 with the big sneeze in the bowling alley, but he knocks down all the pins for the game.
Right.
But anyway, it is still this act that he's putting on. But I think kind of keeping in mind that verbiage from that pitch, that kind of helps me reconcile that a little bit. Like that's who he was, and then he becomes something else. The memory is still there, though.
I hadn't thought of that, but I think that's absolutely right. I really do. It could be like, this is a weird analogy, and I've never been to war, but it almost reminds me of a teenager who goes to war and comes back transformed from the experience of war. That's could be what it is. So you come back, and who you were is still there, but you are now this new person.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Again, I've never been to war, so I'm not trying to trivialize anybody who's served. But that's sort of what just popped into my head, though, when you're talking about the transformation.
Yeah. And then I think one other thing that it's funny, I always forget about this line from All-Star Superman. And then whenever I reread it, it hits me and I tear up every time. But it's in the third to last issue, and Superman is writing his last will and testament. And he writes, to Clark Kent, The mild-mannered reporter who never let me forget how it feels to be a downtrodden, ordinary man. I'm getting chills as I'm reading it. That line, it hits me like a ton of bricks every time. And it's like, no, the idea of Clark as the disguise is never really going to be what I have in my head canon, but that notion of what it allows him to do.
Yeah.
There's something to that. And I don't know if you came across this on social media recently. I guess Mark Waid was at a convention and he was asked about the purpose that Clark Kent serves to Superman. And his answer was, it's like a breather for him. And it's a way for him to kind of relate to people in a natural way and learn what their concerns are. And then the analogy he uses, like, if you're Tom Brady and you go to a sports bar, like, you're not going to have a regular conversation with people. Like, they're just not going to engage with you in that way. Same thing for Superman, right? Like, if he goes somewhere as Superman, it's a very, very different type of experience, as opposed to if he's just like sitting there as Clark.
That interaction with those people at the Daily Planet or people he meets in the streets as Clark Kent, and listening and observing and being able to do so without the costume, where people are looking at him as this godlike being or this hero, whatever you want to do it, call it. I think that's an important way for him to keep his connection with his own humanity and with the humans around him, the humanity around him. It keeps him grounded, basically. So it's not all, because if he's just Superman, then it's an entirely different plane of existence than being Clark.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I said before that, even in this era where Clark is essentially the disguise, there are exceptions. And I would say far and away the biggest exception, George Reeves.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, you're saying that they're the same guy, basically?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
I mean, well, I think I've made this joke on the show even, is that the thing I used to think about that show is Clark calls somebody up, is talking to them on the phone, takes his glasses off in the middle of the conversation. The guy on the other end of the phone would say, when did Superman get on the line? And it's like, when did that happen? And no, his voice didn't change. There's nothing different about their portrayal. That's the problem with I love the George Reeves show, so don't get me wrong, but to me, that's always been a problem. It's like, there's no difference between the two of them.
Well, George, it's so interesting to me. And I feel like for those of us like you and me, right, who gravitate towards that post-crisis depiction where Clark is the guy, I feel like we owe a huge debt to the George Reeves series, because Mike Carlin and the other Triangle era creators, like, they have cited the George Reeves show as an influence. And so to at least some extent, right, like, that was an inspiration for putting Clark front and center.
It was. And you do, and I will give that, especially in those first two seasons of the show, you really get to see Clark be a reporter. You really get to see him interact with people on that level of being a reporter. So that is very interesting about that. It's so funny. You say these things and suddenly it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But it's true. It's true. It does, because you as much as it always bothered me, that like lack of separation of identity, just the glasses and literally that's it. The point is, yeah, his Clark was a very human Clark in a lot of ways, but not a wimp and not somebody who's being a nebbish, a tough guy who, even though Lois would call him a wimp and stuff, it's like, are you looking at the same guy we are? Because he kind of wasn't being wimpy.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there's very little delineation between George Reeves's Clark and Superman. I mean, my dear friend Rich Roney, who's joined me for so many of those Adventures of Superman episodes, he really describes Superman as an extension of Clark in that show. And I think that's an accurate way of looking at it.
Yeah.
There are a few fleeting instances like where you do see a little bit of a distinction. I mean, in the origin episode, Superman on Earth, when Clark shows up at the Daily Planet to try to get a job, yes, he's a little bit more timid in his initial approach.
That could also be first episode that he's playing Clark Kent. I mean, if you think about it, but
yeah. Although not the first one they filmed. Be careful now. I'll hear from people about that.
Oh no, you're absolutely Superman in the Moment, 1951.
Don't get me in trouble here. But
my bad.
But yeah, so like there's a moment like that. There are other instances here and there where like he'll excuse himself and it's perceived as him being a coward. But again, I mean, these are few and far between by and large on that show. And especially in those first two seasons where the show had more teeth. Clark is confident, direct, authoritative. And to your point, our friend Zach Moore, who just joined me on an episode of the other podcast, he used the word paradox. And I think that's apt as well. Like, I think a paradox of the show is that they want to preserve this illusion that like, oh, Clark is seen as this coward, yet that's not the way he behaves. And even the other characters in so many episodes, like Clark is always the one they want to, like when there's danger, oh, get Clark. Like he's always the one.
Think of his interactions with Inspector Henderson, right? This is not I mean, they're like both looking at a case and saying, we got to solve this. We got to figure this out, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And you mentioned the voice. I mean, when we're looking at other depictions, especially in the golden and silver ages, right? You look at the radio show, and then
that's in its own class. I mean,
yeah, but then like the Fleischer shorts, and then later Filmation, like when we're in that animated space and, legendary Bud Collyer and always, having Clark up here, this is a job for Superman. It's like, really drawing that line of distinction here. You really don't see that so much in the Reeves show.
No, not at all. I mean, there's none of that. In this movie, I even like the bit where she goes, "You'll let me interview you, right?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Sure." She goes, "Superman." He leans forward and goes, "Miss Lane." And his voice just completely has a whole different tone to it, than he had.
And look, I always feel bad to beat up on poor Kirk Allen, but to Kirk Allen's credit in those live action serials, there was more of a distinction between his Clark and Superman. I felt like his Clark really leaned into more of that meek and mild, timid persona. Yeah. So again, all to say that I feel like the George Reeves show during the golden and silver age history of the character like really was an outlier. And I feel like really kind of paved the way for what we would see in this modern era where Clark is a big driver of the action. And there's a lot of integrity and competence to the character. And I feel like I don't think it's a coincidence that, when do we see this version of Clark the most? When it's a show or a comic series that's really built around Clark and the Daily Planet and the supporting cast, right? The George Reeves show, the Triangle era comics, where you had 4 monthly books. You had a weekly show, so to speak, Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. I feel like if you're going to tell a story, right, and really dive into that side of things, I feel like you only get so far with the Clark who's tripping over himself. Like there has to be more there.
Well, look, even when Superboy started the show, Superboy, right? John Haymes Newton took a much more serious approach to Clark Kent. And granted, the scripts weren't good at all. So it didn't give him a lot to play. But he did not want to do the nebbish. He didn't think that could be sustained on a series. And of course, when they changed it and they got rid of him and brought in Gerard Christopher, to some degree at least, we got that more nebbish Clark Kent than John Haymes Newton had played. And I'm not saying it was bad. I'm just saying, but that was more in the Christopher Reeve mode. And it's great to get a movie every 2 years where you're getting Clark Kent behaving that way. But like Tyler in Superman and Lois, I thought was he didn't do a lot to distinguish himself either between the two, but his Clark was sincere, but without being a nebbish. He was a good man. As corny as that sounds, he was a good man and conveyed that almost in everything he did.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's a whole history, obviously, of different versions. But.
Yeah. And I thought this would be fun to kind of survey. Now I know the answer to this, but I feel like if ever there were an opportunity to mention that Kill Bill speech about,
I'm trying to remember that.
Oh, okay. Here, I printed it out. I'll read it.
Good. Please do.
So, all right, bear with me here. Bill says, now a staple of the superhero mythology is there's the superhero and there's the alter ego. Batman is actually Bruce Wayne. Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker. When that character wakes up in the morning, he's Peter Parker. He has to put on a costume to become Spider-Man. And it is in that characteristic Superman stands alone. Superman didn't become Superman. Superman was born Superman. When Superman wakes up in the morning, he's Superman. His alter ego is Clark Kent. His outfit with the big red S, that's the blanket he was wrapped in as a baby when the Kents found him. Those are his clothes. What Kent wears, the glasses, the business suit, that's the costume. That's the costume Superman wears to blend in with us. Clark Kent is how Superman views us. And what are the characteristics of Clark Kent? He's weak, he's unsure of himself, he's a coward. Clark Kent is Superman's critique on the whole human race.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. I don't know if I necessarily agree with all of it, but because I'm kind of still on the idea of Clark not being the disguise. I mean, that's so I'm kind of hung up on that. That's a cool speech, though.
It's a sort of thing, like when I watched that for the first time as a high schooler, it's like, oh my God, like my mind is blown. Even then it's like, I never agreed with it. And obviously it did not line up at all with the version of the character I was seeing in the comics and on screen. right? But it's an intriguing idea. And I think when you look at this traditional notion of Clark as the disguise, meek and mild, tripping over himself, I get where this is coming from, but I don't agree. And even in that traditional model, I don't think Superman is behaving that way as Clark, because that's how he sees people.
Exactly. And that was what I was going to say. It's like, it's almost becomes then Superman looking down at people and offering a critical eye at them, basically. And maybe that's too Pollyanna of me, but I mean, and that's one of the things I liked about the new movie is when the man rescued a squirrel from a truck, every life counts. And he's not going to sit there and put people down or think that I'm going to do this Clark because it represents the common man in the way I see human. I don't buy that. I just don't see his personality when his personality is being handled the right way, would look down on anybody. I just don't see it. I mean, I'm not, again, is anybody perfect? No. And it's a fictional character, of course, but based on who Superman is and what his morality is. And a lot of what we see in this movie, everybody matters.
Yeah.
Deep breaths, ma'am. Just take your deep breaths. It'll be fine. Right. And then flying back into battle. I mean, that's who Superman is to me. So.
Yeah, no, the word we keep coming back to, I think, with this version that we see on screen is kindness. I think that's the defining characteristic, and we're shown that consistently throughout the movie, and it definitely resonates. The last thing I'll say about this very traditional model of Clark as the disguise, I think ultimately why it's never grabbed me is that, as a fan of the Smallville, Jonathan and Martha, Clark Kent side of things, like it just feels like it's minimizing the character of Clark and minimizing the role of his upbringing and who he is. If Clark is just kind of reduced to this cover. Right. The other thing too is that I find a lot of value in him actually caring about being a journalist. That's the other side of it, right? Like, so if he's only doing this so he can keep his ear to the ground at the paper, I mean, that doesn't really mean as much today. He wouldn't really need to do that,
Probably wouldn't even be employed.
Yeah. And so I feel like in a lot of, especially in modern stories, we've seen instances of Clark being a reporter, it mattering to Clark actually, fighting for justice with the pen as well. And I always love when we see Clark telling a different kind of story than Lois would tell. Like the pilot episode of Lois and Clark, for example, when Clark does that human interest story on that woman who refuses to leave that building that's going to be demolished, right? Like that was really sweet. And it's, he has a different perspective and a different angle. And then even at the end of James Gunn's Superman, right, where instead of interviewing Superman again, right, he has this story about the food vendor and his sacrifice and what a hero he was. Like, I like that a lot. And I think when journalism is important to Clark, I think that in and of itself that elevates the Clark identity as well.
Well, look at the director's cut of Batman v Superman.
Sure.
Clark is so much more of the investigative reporter in that, and it makes it so much more appealing than the way it was originally presented. Suddenly you're digging into Clark Kent doing his job rather than Superman doing his job. And I found that's why the Ultimate Edition is like my favorite version of that movie, because it just digs deeper, and Clark gets to be Clark Kent rather than just Superman briefly turning back into Clark Kent.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We don't even count the theatrical cut of that anymore.
No, we shouldn't. As well, we shouldn't. That's right.
That's really the only thing. I just circling back to Reeves for a second. This idea of a paradox, like them trying to have their cake and eat it too with the Clark persona. I felt like in the post-Infinite Crisis comic book landscape, when Jeff Johns took over and he was doing some writing with Richard Donner, and then he had Gary Frank on art, and Gary Frank was essentially drawing Christopher Reeve.
Yeah.
I feel like that was another instance where they tried to have their cake and eat it too, because, essentially post-crisis continuity was still intact more or less. And Clark was married to Lois, but all of a sudden Perry is putting Clark down and he's more bumbling. Like they were leaning into the Christopher Reeve shtick, but it was still by and large the post-crisis version and I just felt like you're trying to have your cake and eat it too with this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is the thing I want to say. And this from previous conversations, I love the Christopher Reeve movies. I really do. But you have to step away from it. You have to move beyond them in a lot of ways. It's okay to do like this movie I mentioned before, the John Williams theme and stuff being in this movie. Yes, tap into those elements, but be your own Superman. Tell your own Superman story with the character being true to who he is.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now,
That's why in the comic it's kind of like, do you really have to lean that hard into these movies?
100%. Now, like I said, I think even in these kind of big categories we've created of pre and post crisis, there are exceptions like Adventures of Superman, and there is nuance as well, because I really think this is important. I think when we get to the Bronze Age, you see more sophistication in terms of the treatment of the identity.
Yeah.
And I mean, even like we were talking about Superman 330 and the nightmare that he has. But beyond that, I do want to talk a little bit more about the Reeve films. But before that, in 1976, there was a 4-part Bronze Age storyline written by Cary Bates and Elliot S. Maggin, who took the super out of Superman. And it's from Superman 296 through 299. Now, had you ever read this before?
No, this is again one of those Bronze. This was lovely homework for me because I discovered another story I didn't know.
Here's the thing. I don't want to pin too much on this one story because I admittedly, my Bronze Age reading is still fairly limited and I have a lot more work to do on that front. But I don't think this kind of sophistication is limited to this story. But even if it were, it still warrants inclusion here, I think, as a really kind of fascinating wrinkle in the identity. So the basic premise of this, the setup is a little silly, but I think the impact of what it's trying to go for, I think really works. But the setup is that whenever Clark is wearing his Clark Kent clothes, he has no powers. And whenever he's wearing his Superman costume, he has his powers. Now, we don't find this out until deep into the story, but his neighbor is an alien, an undercover agent who's trying to bring about the end of the world for his superiors on his homeworld. And what he has done is he has essentially treated all of Clark Kent's clothes at his apartment with a chemical that sunscreens them so that whenever he's wearing them,
makes perfect sense.
He doesn't have his powers. The silliest part of this is in one of the early issues, he's trying to change to Superman and he's got like, I don't know, his pants, his Clark Kent pants are around his ankles and it's like he still has no power. So if any article of Clark Kent clothing is on him, no powers.
Right. Because they've been sunscreened.
So look, it's a silly setup, but I love this story. And this is one, if I'm not mistaken, not available on the DC app. What else is new? But if you go to Superman Through the Ages, which is a wonderful repository and resource, not only do they have the 4 issues to read, but one of their contributors, I suppose, sort of spruced it up a little bit. They have what they call the special edition. So they added some backgrounds and some sound effects. They cleaned up some pages. They restored original dialogue that was intended by the authors that actually points towards Lois and Clark having spent the night together that they were not allowed to run with in the original instance. So it's well worth reading over at Superman Through the Ages. But essentially, Clark decides to spend a week as Clark, like just live his life as Clark. I thought it was interesting that he started with Clark, right? He has this whole thing about like, I've lived my life, on Earth, right? Like it makes sense that this is who I am. So it's interesting that he started with that. And then he spends a week as Superman. I mean, what did you make of all of this?
I thought it was, I have to say, I thought it was too long. I thought this 4 issues was too long for this story. Okay. To be honest with you, I could have done it 3, I'd be very happy. That being said, I think the exploration of the dual identity in this way was unique and fascinating. I mean, just to see also the sort of subtle ways both Clark and Superman were changing when they weren't worried about the other, how Clark became more confident and wasn't going to take crap from people, Steve Lombard and Morgan Edge, and he could express his feelings for Lois, and then with Superman being a little edgier as Superman for some reason, like without the calmness of Clark or worrying about Clark. He has some pretty rough lines in this thing. I think he tells the cops at one point, like, you'll go to jail, tells the bad guys, rather, you'll go to jail or you can be shark bait. I mean, shark bait? And that's not making him a bad guy or anything, but just edgier. Like I said, I think it was trying for the times also to make it edgier, but it was just such a fascinating look and to see him change in each one of those things and really trying to decide which he wanted to be. Although we knew from page 1 that he was always going to be both. But I thought it was a very effective story. I really did.
It was, yeah. I mean, right. Like, I don't think the ultimate outcome is a shock, but it was important for him to go through that process.
Yeah.
And I echo everything you said about what the experience is like, but it's, there's this trade-off. So it's like, yes, he's able to stand up to Steve Lombard and mouth off to his boss and have this romantic evening with Lois. So as I was alluding to before, in the comic that saw print, Lois is in the office the next day and Steve Lombard has a line about like another new outfit or like something like that. But the original version was, oh, Lois, same dress as yesterday.
That was great, especially for that time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so the implication being that Lois and Clark spent the night together, and that's what you see in the special edition of the comic. So he's able to express himself in a way that he wasn't able to before, but he has to stand by while all of these disasters proceed. And in most instances, it seems like others will step in, like there's a fire and the fire department shows up, but there are other things presumably he's just not getting to. Right. So so there's that challenge. And then the flip of it as Superman, I agree with you. Maybe he's a little bit unmoored. He doesn't have the calming influence of the Clark persona, but also he can't take a break, to Mark Waid's point, right? He can't take a break. There's a point where he tries to talk to Jimmy. Like he says, like, Jimmy, I've got this problem. I'm trying to unwind. And Jimmy's like, there's no time to unwind. Like, you got to get back out there.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
And all to say that I think what this story really shows as really kind of a nuance in this depiction of the double identity is that duality, right? Because I feel like by this point, what we're seeing here, it's not so much true persona and disguise, but in my view, I guess more of a duality. Like there are two sides to this person.
Absolutely. Yeah. The story really explores that in a great way. And you don't have to do Superman Red, Superman Blue, right? It could just be the one guy just experimenting with himself and trying to figure out what his place is and what each one of these guys represents, not only to him, but the world around him.
Yeah. Is there anything else about that comic book storyline that stood out to you that you want to talk about?
Think about that for a second, because I think we've covered the major things about it. I mean, it was really strong, and I kind of, when he realizes he's going to be both, the way he goes back to taking crap from Steve Lombard and like is totally different with Lois again. And she's feeling, because in that era too, Lois wasn't always very nice to him at all. I mean, Lois was kind of bitchy in that period. And so to see that softer side of Lois was really kind of neat. And then to lose that at the end, like, okay, back to business as usual. It's like the end of a TV show, right? Yeah. Back then you had to reset at the end of the episode. Everything goes back to the way it was. But I liked it. I really enjoyed the experiment of it, basically.
It's funny. We did an episode not too long ago, our trade paperback wish list. And I think if we ever do a follow-up to that, I think this would be great fodder for a DC Finest edition, obviously with the other issues around it. But it's a fascinating and a multi-part story at a time where you didn't see a lot of those, and really delving into the psychology and what each persona represents to him and the value that each one brings. I mean, it's not one or the other. He needs both to be this complete person. And I don't know how much of that, if at all, you really saw before. So I feel like this was really ahead of its time.
I mean, I hadn't thought it till you just said that, but what it reminds me of is, I don't know how much of a Star Trek fan you are. I don't remember. Not really. But they did an episode called The Enemy Within, in which Captain Kirk was split into his, they make the joke of the evil Captain Kirk, but it's the more aggressive side of Captain Kirk and the softer side of Captain Kirk. And by episode's end, you realize you need both sides to balance each other out to be able to be a whole. And that's exactly what goes on with Superman and Clark in this.
That was pretty much all I had on that front. But the other, I think, major wrinkle in the identity depiction is in the Christopher Reeve movie series. And I was really thinking about this a lot. I feel like across the 4 films, and especially 1, 2, and 3, it's like you see kind of like a few different permutations of this. You could argue there's an evolution over the course of them, because I think in Superman the movie, it's kind of like what we were saying before, what we saw in that Superman 2000 pitch, right? Where he is Clark Kent to a point, and then he really becomes somebody else, but there's the memory that still persists, even as Clark becomes this facade and kind of the bumbling, sticky version of himself. So much so that in the special edition, which is Donner's preferred version and my favorite version of the movie, there's that scene after the first night of saves where he communes with Jor-El.
Right.
And there's this whole discussion about whether or not he needs to retain his Clark Kent identity. And Superman's position is he doesn't want to.
Right.
He's like, why?
because they'll keep you busy 26 hours a day or 24 hours in your time,
Yeah.
your worlds. But but you get to see, it's so funny because you get to see some of that change in Superman and regarding Clark and all. When even in Superman 2, and I guess this is the Donner cut, where he wants to give up his powers, and Jor-El basically says you can't, and he goes, after all I've done for them,
Yeah.
it's like I can't do this for me. Why not? You know what I mean? And it's kind of interesting to see that little edgier version of Clark or or Clark in that moment. It's like I have a right to live a life of my own.
That's the thing. I mean, I think that's really looking at, you know, even as we're talking about these different, variations and everything, even within that one film series, you see different versions. And, to go from wanting to give up his civilian guys in the first movie to wanting to stop being Superman in the second movie. But then, in Superman 2, the scene with Lois where he's talking about maintaining this double life. And he says to Lois, like, what does he say? Like, sometimes I even like being Clark.
Yeah.
Right.
And if it wasn't for him, I never would have met you.
Right. Which that cuts both ways. Because yes, there's what Clark represents, but then also still that part of me of like being Clark. Like it's still an act that he's putting on.
Right.
But I guess for me, what I really hone in on with Superman 2 especially is I think this is really kind of pointing towards this Trinity approach that I've been talking about. Except here it's not the farm, but it's the fortress. Like in the fortress, he's his truest, most honest self.
Right.
Right. And then
but that to me is still the Clark of Smallville. It's his honest self. I mean, changed again, looking back and holding on to that memory of that Clark. But that's Clark. I mean, that's him as Clark. And in my mind, I mean, that's how I would view the Fortress stuff.
Yeah. And then by the time you get to Superman 3, I mean, the fact that we have that iconic junkyard battle, it's not between good Superman and bad Superman. It's between Clark and the evil version of Superman. And it's Clark that triumphs. I mean, I don't know, maybe, maybe I'm giving them more credit or reading more into it, but I mean, I feel like that is kind of telling that like that was the way that story was positioned.
It was. I mean, see, I've always had a problem, not in 1983, but as the years have gone on, with that scene, because I'm not so sure that Clark embracing his Superman in that persona should come from him strangling Superman. I've always had a problem with that because then he kills him and then he opens his shirt and we get the bam, and we go on from there. So I'm like probably not the best person to ask about that because I really find that a very odd way for Clark to sort of regain himself by literally strangling Superman.
Sure. I think that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. I'm not saying there aren't other questions to be had, but no, just the fact that you get to that point that Clark is the one representing the good side, the true essence of the character.
He's the triumphant one. Clark is the one that of the two that survives it, so to speak, and rises.
Yeah. So like I said, I mean, as much as, we talk about that pre-crisis era as kind of falling into one category, you definitely see that evolution, especially as we get into the Bronze Age with that comic book storyline we talked about and across the Reeve series. And I really appreciate that. And then, by the time we're in post-crisis territory, very much Clark is front and center. That's the sweet spot for me. That's what I grew up with. But look, I'll be honest. I do think they overshot the mark at a certain point, particularly in the comics where not only is Clark this star reporter, but he's an acclaimed novelist and he was this high school star. I mean, look, they got good value out of it when it turned Kenny Braverman into Conduit, right? Because he was fueled by this jealousy. But that aside, I mean, I do think there's a line, like we don't have to have Clark tripping over himself. He can have some success and be competent and confident. Right. At the same time, I think you don't want to go too far in the other direction.
Right. No, absolutely. And there's always that danger of doing that. But overall, though, I mean, I have to say, I think most of the interpretations have handled the dual identity thing well. And there's a real delineation between post and pre-crisis. Because like I said, the comics I grew up with, I mean, Clark was there to have Lois try to cut his hair and prove that he's Superman. I mean, you know what I mean? Clark didn't do an awful lot in those stories, most of those stories. So I embraced the later ones where he became more of a real person.
Yeah. It's funny. I struggle a little bit with Smallville in a weird way because for 10 seasons, we're following Clark, right? That's his journey. And then in the final season, though, he makes the decision that Clark Kent is going to be the disguise, right? He's at a point in this journey. He's been operating in secret as the Blur, but not sticking around long enough for people to see him. But he knows that the time is coming. He's going to need to step into the light and be that symbol of hope, and has come to the conclusion people need to see his face. It's the face of the man his parents raised, as he tells Lois. It's the face of the man she's fallen in love with. This is from the episode Masquerade, as we're, 2/3 of the way through the final season. So he's not going to wear a mask, right? Clark Kent is going to be the disguise. And he says Clark Kent is just a word. It's just a name. It doesn't define him. And so in that episode, and then the booster episode a little while later, written by Jeff Johns, we have what they call the unmaking of Clark Kent, right? So now he puts on we get a few scenes of Tom Welling in the glasses. He knocks a couple of things over. He's a little more timid. There's a great scene where he goes to interview Ted Cord, and he's tripping over his words, and he complains about a milkshake I had and my stomach hurts. And I think he was great. I thought he was very funny. It was, it wasn't over the top, but I felt like he struck a nice balance. But it was just kind of interesting. It's not even that I'm necessarily kind of prescribing a different approach that they should have followed, but it was just kind of interesting so late in the game that they just leaned into, okay, like we're gonna do mild mannered, kind of bumbly Clark Kent, and Clark is just a name, right? Like that, it doesn't matter.
I mean, look, I do think the final season was a little rushed, shall we say.
Sure.
In his, we will not talk about that final episode. Well, I won't, because then I go off on tirades, and people have got to be tired of hearing me go off on a tirade about it. But it's him stepping into that persona of Clark Kent. I mean, for him to say that Clark Kent is kind of, what were you saying? Like
it's just a word. It's just a name.
See, I don't buy that, but I don't buy that because we've watched Clark Kent go through this journey, not Superman, not Superboy.
Yeah. But I have to say, I know I'll kind of advocate for the show now. I mean, I think ultimately, I think he was speaking about it more in the context of Clark at the planet, like Clark walking the streets of Metropolis.
Sure.
I think at the end of the day, that show still kind of falls into that kind of Trinity sweet spot for me, where like on the farm, which is where we spend most of our time with that character on that show, that's the truest essence. And yes, the Clark who goes to the planet is really going to be this disguise.
Yeah.
And all of that. So yeah, it was just kind of interesting, kind of like how at the last minute they really pivoted to that.
Oh my God. Yeah. And then of course we find out that he's back to being just Clark because he's no longer Superman, according to Crisis on Infinite Earths.
That's right. But we made our peace with that. It's all good. I promise. And then, bringing us basically to the present, and obviously we're not going through every single thing, but I guess my last big observation in some recent iterations, specifically Superman and Lois and My Adventures with Superman, I feel like here I feel like we're still very much in like Clark is who he is, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But I feel like here you're actually seeing more of a disguise, so to speak, in the Superman persona, where I feel like with both Superman and Lois and My Adventures, you tell me if you disagree, but I feel like the true Clark there like is a bit nerdier, right? And like it's very excited. And I feel like there's more of a stoic, persona that he's trying to put on when he's Superman.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think when you're watching that I was going to say transformation, but that's not the right word. It is. It probably is an air of putting it on of My Adventures with Superman, especially because he's really discovering it and who he is for the first time. I mean, he's really in those early days of being Superman. So it's fun watching that because I don't know if that show is going to go beyond its third season or not, but I assume it won't. But it's interesting watching already the changes in him. The more he learns, the more about his own heritage, about the world, about the adventures he's on. It just feels like it feels like less of an act being Superman. It feels like he's like becoming more comfortable with it and he's embracing it. It's still a separation between him and Clark, but it's just an interesting watching him mature as Superman as that show's gone on in its first two seasons.
Yeah. But it's just like kind of taking this long view. It's just kind of wild now. I feel like to get to a point. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you can argue to an extent too, like, Dean Cain's Clark and Lois and Clark, maybe puffing out his chest a little bit more as Super. But I feel like with these two recent ones, especially, I really feel like you see it more. And it's just kind of interesting to see the pendulum swing that way.
Yeah.
I love Tyler Hoechlin, and I don't mean to beat up on him. And this is a scene people really seem to love, but in the final season when we get the flashback to how he revealed his identity to Lois's father, General Sam Lane.
Right.
Obviously, a play on that scene from Superman the movie, right, where the glasses come off and he stands up,
Right.
and I
But
love
the transformation isn't as pronounced. It just isn't.
Yeah, there's just not enough there. Like, it's not different enough. I mean, people seem to like it, so I don't want to beat up on it, but I just feel like they set him up there. It's like, come on, don't do a moment like that when you've not had enough of a differentiation between the characters.
I mean, absolutely. And that's the big thing. Because again, you go back to that scene of Superman the movie where Clark takes off the glasses, straightens up, and turns around, and it's just like, holy shit, that guy just changed in front of my eyes. No, there's none of that with Tyler in that scene. And it's unfortunate, though. But then again, both of them have 5 o'clock shadow, that show, which I had a real problem with. It's like, dude, you got to shave. But, I mean, people are not going to notice you. I know that's veering off from what you were talking about. But
no, look, it ties into, right, like whether or not people can tell them apart and everything. Yeah, I guess absolutely. Bringing us home here, we only really got that main scene of Clark at the planet in James Gunn's Superman. So I don't know, this might be hard to answer, but I guess from what we saw whatever you can sort of glean from that. I mean, how do you think we would categorize this interpretation of the dual identity?
Well, I think, look, the real Clark Kent we see on the farm, but also in Lois's apartment in that early scene, right? Where she's going to do the interview with him before the interview goes on. Oh, I'm cooking breakfast or at dinner for dinner, and a little playfulness and stuff. But that's Clark. And then when we see him with the messed up hair and just being, joking around and all, that's the persona he's putting on at the Daily Planet again, and his Superman is just a hell of a nice guy. But I really do feel that the Clark we see on the farm, the Kent farm, and with Lois in her apartment, that's the real Clark Kent that we're seeing in this movie.
I agree. And I think that's kind of an important addendum to the sort of the Trinity theory here that as much as we say Clark on the farm or even Clark in the fortress, I think it's not so much a place, right? But it's who he's surrounded by. Yeah. Right. And whether or not he can just be fully honest. And yes, that can be the apartment, that can be the farm, whatever the case may be. But no, I think you see that. I mean, I think as far as what the take on this Clark is, definitely not bumbly or anything like that. I mean, maybe this is because I love it so much. And so I always kind of have it in my head, but we know that Mark Waid's Birthright was an influence for the movie. And I feel like, unsurprisingly, because I'm always singing its praises, I feel like that book really struck a nice balance where, again, Clark is competent, but he's more just kind of low key, like fades into the background. There's that great scene in Birthright where like everyone else at the planet, they go out, they don't invite Clark, but it's not even so much like, oh, they hate Clark or he's
no, they just didn't think
like overlook him. Right.
Yeah. Right.
And I feel like this Clark, we don't really see enough, but I feel like it's just kind of like that low key vibe. And so I think like, I don't get the sense, well, actually that's a good question. I was going to say, I don't get the sense he's the star reporter, but I don't know. He's got all these interviews with Superman. So maybe he is.
But they all make fun of his writing, so
That's
I don't know. They're all making fun of his writing.
Yeah.
We don't get enough of him in this movie, but part of my allowance, so to speak, with this movie is just the feeling that I think Gunn was going for, where he was just plopping us into two things. One, just dropping us into a comic book rather than a movie per se. We were just put immediately in a comic book, which is why you don't have explanations for pocket universes and cloning and Supergirl showing up, and these things just happen. And I feel like, and part of that, I guess, is you have to have a certain amount of history of Superman. So for me, because I feel like this is a story that's already in motion, that Clark Kent and Lois, that's the relationship. And I already have all the background I need from the Daily Planet, from the different characters, from all the other so many interpretations before this. So when I'm seeing him, it's like we're in the middle of that case. Clark Kent. We're not doing an origin story. He's Clark Kent. He's working at the Daily Planet, and these are the people. So that's how I took it anyway in watching it.
Yeah, sure. This isn't necessarily germane to the identity, although in a larger sense it is. But obviously we talked a lot in recent episodes about the message from Jor-El and Lara and this business about being sent to conquer. And like I said, as a fan of Smallville, I felt right at home. And I think that, in the context of what the theme of this movie was and this appreciation he needed to attain for the role the Kents played in his upbringing, right? Like it ties in. At the same time, I've maintained, like, I'm still not convinced that that's the final message. But Gunn has been adamant. I mean, since we've recorded our last episodes, he's done more interviews. He did one with Josh Horowitz, who I'm a big fan of. And I mean, Gunn was like, again, adamant that no, this is the message. I was like, I don't get why people think it's there's going to be a twist. He's like, Lex confirmed it. Mr. Terrific confirmed it.
Once Mr. Terrific confirmed it, and this guy seems to know everything about everything, I kind of like accepted the fact that it's the message. But because the way the movie ends the way it does, with he likes to hear these words, you know, his parents are soothing to him. And then you see the whole movies and that great smile Corin Sweat gives when he's laying down watching the whole movies, basically. That to me is like, okay, fine. Jarrell and Laura were asses, and now his real parents are Jonathan and Martha, and look what they gave him.
Yeah.
Look what they gave the world, right? Jarrell and Laura may have sent this kid here to become this conqueror, but instead, Jonathan and Martha turned him into the hero for everybody.
Yeah. I will say too, I mean, I know people have very strong feelings about this. I don't feel like the message, even if it turns out to be true, and according to Gunn it is, I don't feel like it completely undermines the Kryptonian side of the equation. I mean, there's more to his heritage that obviously he's clearly already living. He's got the fortress, he's got the robots, he's got his cousin. So, you know, I don't feel like it completely wipes away that side of things, because it is always important to me. I've said this so many times, and it is true. He's a product of both worlds. Yeah. But I think now it's more about, him, these choices, his actions, as Pa says. And it's funny, our pal in podcasting, Zach Moore, he posed the question on social media about, like, do we think the S symbol might change now in a subsequent movie, now that we have this backstory about Jor-El and Lara? And my response was like, no, I think it stays, and I want it to stay, because I think now it's more about what Superman is going to make it mean, redefining it on his own through his actions. And I think there's value in that. But I just wanted to mention that, because I know we talked a lot about it. Like, I'm not convinced the message is real. I don't know. I guess I'll accept it if that's what Gunn says. But
I kind of initially I said, bull, it's not true. There's no way. And then it's like, you know what? All right, let it be the message. And I also suspect that when Supergirl comes out next year, we're going to get a greater sense of what Krypton was like.
Sure.
Because she experienced it and Kal-El didn't. So it's going to be interesting to see that and see where that goes. And hopefully she'll fill in some of the blanks on what Krypton was. Maybe Jor-El and his brother were fighting each other. They saw things very differently. Who knows? I have no idea, obviously, what they're going to do. But anyway, just possibilities. So hopefully we'll get more about Krypton as time goes on.
Yeah, it's funny. To me, the bigger twist wasn't so much the Jor-El and Lara piece. I think to me, the biggest twist was that Clark needed to go on this journey to come to appreciate the Kents in a deeper way.
Absolutely.
And on my first watch, that did not totally, like, because in my head I was kind of filling it in for Clark, right? I'm like, well, no, of course he knows what they've done for him, but yeah, I mean, that was his journey here.
Sometimes you have to be reminded of the most obvious thing, and the experience with what happened with the revelation about Jor-El and Lara, and then to have his parents, his father especially, being so supportive of him. And, that I couldn't be more proud of you. That stuff, it just touched his heart, and it ultimately changed his perspective of who his real parents are, reminding him that these are his parents.
Yeah.
So good stuff. I mean, really, I was very moved by the ending of that movie.
Good. Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on here. It was really fun talking about all the Hypno Glasses business. And I'm glad we conducted our little survey of the Clark Superman identity and how that's been depicted over time. Because, like I said, it comes up a lot, but I felt like this would be a cool opportunity to just sort of lay it all out, and interesting to see how it's evolved over time. And yeah, for me, sweet spot is always Clark as the primary force, but really that Trinity idea resonates with me.
That's a good one. I like it, and it makes sense. But as long as Clark isn't the center of it, so that's all. The real Clark.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Is there anything else you want to say before we?
Oh God, I don't think there's anything else I could say.
All right. Well, where would you like to direct folks?
Look, just my personal blog is edgrosswriter.com. And if you're into classic TV, look up classictvwomensworld.com, and all my stories will come up there.
Right on. Well, thank you, Ed. It's always a pleasure. I encourage everyone to check out your work. And audience, this is our official episode for this week, but on Friday, make sure you head on over to my Patreon page. We're going to have a special bonus companion episode that's going to be free to the public. So whether you're a paid member or not, you can listen to it. And as much as now we've sort of laid out how the Superman-Clark identity has been depicted over time, this bonus episode is going to make the argument for why Superman should maintain a secret identity. We've had stories in recent years where he has revealed himself to the world. We're going to talk about why maybe that's not the best course of action. And I'll be joined for that by Perry Constantine, host of the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. So again, this Friday on the Patreon page for free, you get a fun companion to this episode that Ed and I just did. So tune in for that. Come back here next week. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. Support the show and receive exclusive content, including the spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, advanced listens, and more by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Subscribe, rate, and review today via your platform of choice, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Links are in the show notes. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now covering the color era of the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today.